it's not difficult to get new ideas in. It is more difficult to get old ideas out. For us, that was one of the biggest challenges when we set out on our journey. But we have always done it this way. We have always done it this way doesn't mean that you need to continue doing it the same way.
Balancing risk, regulation, and innovation is critical.
Yes. At the end of the day, I always believe it's people's business. The biggest risk is the risk of not doing anything. And frankly speaking, in today's day and age, if somebody says, I have a 5-year roadmap and a 5-year vision and a 5-year plan, they're just kidding themselves because the world changes every 6 months.
When is enough?
I think it all goes back to conviction in the business.
Hello, everybody, and I guess welcome to season 4 of Couchonomics with Arjun. Never thought we'd make it this far. We're kicking off our season, and these are one of the first few episodes that I'm recording from our, existing studio with a new look. I hope you guys like it. But more importantly, let me introduce the guest who I have sitting across the couch, and the couch has changed after a few seasons. His name is Gautam Jain. He's the operating member with SC Ventures, which is a part of Standard Chartered Bank. With that, let me welcome Gautam. Gautam.
Thank you, Arjun. Pleasure being here.
On the couch, as I have to say.
On the couch, absolutely.
Right. Now, Gautam, been following SC Ventures for years, right? CVC or venture building by banks is a topic that I find quite interesting. I tend to write about it. I don't know if most people like what I write about it, but I think we'll get that out in the mix today. But I guess before we get in, and we have a fairly sort of global audience, and I know you guys in Standard Chartered are across 50 markets. Let me just ask the first simple question. What does SC Ventures do?
Well, SC Ventures, we are primarily business builders and operators, right? We tend to build businesses which occupy a white space or an adjacent space because we firmly believe that financial institutions need to relook at innovation in a different way. Because the whole society is changing, right? And society's expectation from financial services is changing. Mm-hmm. So while innovation has been the buzzword in this industry for quite some time, innovation has not really happened in business models. So that is what we have set out to do. We create new business models, we spin them out as separate and distinct entities, and we hope that they scale in their own right and become very, very successful and serve the clients the way they want to be served. In addition, we also invest in other people's companies, partners only. So we invest in people we work with in order to get a ringside view, in order to influence the direction of travel, but also to help them grow scale within our ecosystem and the wider financial services industry. So this is primarily what we do.
So if I break this a little bit further down, so you have a venture studio, venture building side to the business, and then you also have a CVC side to the business. Would you call it CVC, or is it more of a pure play investment play?
We generally don't like to be called a CVC,
okay,
right? So we have a venture building side. We once we build the venture, we operate those businesses as well. And yeah, we do venture investing, but with a twist, because we only invest in partners. And we are investing from a strategic angle rather than a financial angle.
Okay.
Financial angle is important, but we first solve for relevance. And within the relevance box, we solve for financial returns. Okay. So all our investees are our partners, but not all our partners are our investees.
Our investees. Great. We're gonna get later on sort of deconstructing, or I guess decoding all of that stuff. So as I was preparing for this episode, and I was trying to say, what are the questions I need to ask, came across this book, right? I'm going to pick it up and show it to the audience. So it's called Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gained. It's written by Alex Manson, but I think you are one of a few contributors on this.
Yep.
So I thought maybe the best way to actually start is, and firstly, thank you for the signed book, appreciate that, is, if you don't mind, I've got 4 or 5 areas I want to dig a bit deeper in the book.
Sure.
Right? Okay. So the first one is, it goes without saying, banks talk the innovation game. Bank talk about how technologically they need to adopt new technologies, business models, and so on and so forth. 9 out of 10 times, nobody talks about the culture and mindset shift, right? And I think there's a specific area where, you guys talk about the importance of the mindset shift, right? Totally appreciate it, right? That there needs to be a systemic change in mindset for banks to be able to innovate sustainably and at scale, right? But the question is how, right? That's the question which I want to ask you. How do banks achieve that shift in mind shift?
Arjun, it is difficult. It's not easy, right? Because when you talk about mindset shifting and thinking differently, I believe that it's not difficult to get new ideas in. It
Mm-hmm.
is more difficult to get old ideas out,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for us, that was one of the biggest challenges when we set out on our journey. It's like, but we have always done it this way. And to educate the whole ecosystem in terms of we have always done it this way doesn't mean that you need to continue doing it the same way is actually going to make it successful, right? You look outside the financial services industry, the adoption of technology and the way the consumers and the clients are behaving is changing very, very rapidly, right? And financial institutions haven't kept up. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to create a almost like a safe ecosystem for experimentation, right? And using that experimentation, start building businesses in a slightly different way. Was it easy to convince the bank? Was it easy to convince the wider population? No, it wasn't. There were several discussions. There was a long lead time. But at the end of the day, to our surprise, what we found is that people are brimming with ideas.
Mm-hmm.
They really want to change. They want to do things in a different way. What SC Ventures did, and I think it did very successfully, is provided a safe platform for those ideas to surface, and then an infrastructure and a process to take those ideas from a twinkle in the eye to something tangible. And then it just becomes a virtuous circle. You have one idea, you see it grow, then the other person thinks, if that guy can do it, so can I. So you get the second one, and you get the third one, and you get the fourth one. And one of the things which we very early on decided is that we are never going to take a top down approach,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because normally what happens in financial institutions is we say innovation is everybody's job. Yeah, right, it is everybody's job. But then you have six ideas, and your manager decides, I like this one and I like that one, and that is the only thing we are going to do. And that may not be right. So we went down the crowdsourcing way. You submit an idea and let the crowd vote which one makes the most sense, and that's when we pick it up, right? So it was by going the collective way, I think that is where the culture and the mindset started shifting much more faster than a top down approach. It took us some time, no doubt about it. But we persisted and we protected and we experimented. And well, 7 years down the line, we have 30 businesses and 23 portfolio companies. So something must be working.
No, it is, and this is the question, right? So it's I guess a bit facetious when a consultant uses the word culture in a sentence, because we've been sort of flogging that idea for for a decade, if not longer, right? When I talk about culture, there's so many parts to it, right? There's everything around, you guys talk about challenging the status quo, right? But let's be honest, the way people are remunerated, they're not remunerated to challenge status quo, right? One could sort of even extend that thought. There's around capabilities, right? So yes, we can collectively vote, but if people just don't have the knowledge to vote, then collective voting is you could land up with a result which might not be the right result. There's all kinds of governance challenges, right? In the way the governance models tend to work. Banks tend to look at regulation and risk in a very different way. So I come back to the question that I understand the journey in terms of identifying an idea, incubating the idea, and spinning it off and giving it the protection. But do you bring those ideas back into the bank and then say, ingest these back into the way you operate as a bank, because it's going to add exponential value to you? To me, that's the harder part of the journey. And I don't know if that's key, or that's a key part of your strategy, or is it more around let's just spin off these jet skis and or speedboats, maybe that's a better analogy, and let these speedboats kind of take off on their own, and if the bank doesn't benefit from a strategic perspective, so be it. We've created a great entity.
So there are several parts to my
Yeah.
answer. So let me first pick up on remuneration and risk framework and
Right.
governance, right? Which you mentioned. So first of all, when we create ventures, we actually incentivize people in a very different way. So all our ventures and all the people who have created these businesses for us have skin in the game. They get a percentage of the business they have created, right? So they are actually incentivized to challenge status quo, right? In terms of governance and regulation, you're absolutely right. The bank is a regulated entity. It has a risk framework. It has a risk appetite, and that is why we do these things outside the bank. That is the safe space for experiment and create new business models. Um, Now, what is it in for the bank, right? You said, do we take these businesses inside the bank? That is one option, right? By creating these businesses outside the bank, we create optionality for the bank, right? So the bank can take the business inside the bank when it finds, strategic value. We created our digital banks in Hong Kong and Singapore, and they were absorbed back in the bank. The bank can actually become a client of the business we have created, right? So that is the second option the bank has. And the third option is that, at a certain point in time, the bank can actually sell the business and realize capital gains, right? Now, when we sell the business, there is a point at every stage of the growth of our business, we ask ourselves the question, are we the right owners? We have taken it from 0 to 1. Are we the right owners to take it from 1 to 10? Are we the right owners to take it from 10 to 100? And if the answer is no, then we sell the business and realize capital gains. So by creating these businesses outside, not only we have created an infrastructure which is safe, right? But by doing that, we have now created multiple options for the bank. Having said that, one of the things which we are very clear on when we create these businesses and the founding teams are told that bank is not an option for exit. It may happen, it may not happen. The bank has an option to use you, not an obligation to use you, right? So the underlying philosophy is that when a business is created, it has to stand up in its own right. It has to obtain market validation on its own. And market validation, it's not just growth, it also has to attract external capital. Because if I have created a baby, it's my baby, it's always beautiful. But till somebody else comes and says, I believe in this idea and therefore I'm going to invest, the market validation has not yet happened, right? So all our businesses have to raise external capital, and that tells us that we are onto something.
Okay, so two questions. One, I'm assuming these people can take on the bank as competitors, or is that something which is not allowed as far as this framework is concerned?
No, I don't think so. That is, it is allowed or disallowed. If you look at our digital banks, they compete with our traditional retail bank, right? However, we tend to occupy white spaces or adjacent spaces by
Okay.
design, right? Because if the bank really needs to enhance its product offering, then it's the bank's job. Having said that, we are also very conscious to say, well, if we are not going to disrupt ourselves, somebody else will. So if we want to cannibalize revenue, let's do it within the group.
And I guess, at a certain level, that philosophically makes perfect sense. My humble opinion, having been in this sector for about 15, 20 years, obviously not sitting on that side of the table, but on the other side of the table, is when that philosophy turns into action, banks tend to struggle. Not just banks, institutions too, right? I used to work for a very large conglomerate, and anytime we actually incubated a business which challenged the status quo, we saw the powers to be get a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that, we had created someone who was cannibalizing us at a faster cost. And let's be honest, the concept of sunken cost is still not fully understood. So people kind of go, we've sunk a $1 billion in this business. Here's this startup that we have created. It's on new tech or it's on new business model. It's eating away profitability on a business which was supposed to come up. I guess you don't have to answer that question. I'm just saying is that it's easier said than done. Let me ask you another question, which I've seen evidence of a challenge is businesses that get incubated by banks, right? Don't find it that easy to raise money in the open markets. Have you experienced that too? And if yes, how do you tend to overcome that?
Businesses that have been incubated by the banks, yes, you're right, don't find it very easy to raise money in the open market because it is always seen as bank owned, right? Our model is different because while the bank through SC Ventures, and I have to distinguish between the bank and SC Ventures because SC Ventures is a separate entity in its own right, owns a percentage of the business, but a large percentage of this business is actually owned by the employees, right? So when external investors come in, if they're looking at a 100% bank-owned business, they automatically step back and say, what is the incentive the founding team has to make this business successful? We have an answer to that through our model. The founding team owns percentage of the business, therefore they have all the incentives to make the business successful. We also demonstrate independence, right? All our businesses have their own boards with independent board members, their own management committee, right? Their own management teams, their own tech stack, right? So by demonstrating the independence from the business, we find it easier, if not very easy, to raise capital from the external market. If you look at most of our businesses and you look at their cap tables, there are external investors in these businesses. So we must be doing something right. Is it easy? No, not really. But it is also a function of the market where raising capital in today's day and age is difficult. But I don't think so. We really struggle with the concept of this is a bank owned business and therefore it can't raise money.
Okay, let me ask a question. I think, and maybe this question is not specific to SC Ventures, but actually, it's a question more for this region, right? My working hypothesis for a lot of banks out here, which don't have scale like you do across 50 markets, I personally feel getting from zero to wherever you want to get to, it's much easier to go with your checkbook with the CVC angle, right, than to go through the venture building model, right? Largely because it takes much longer to realize the value. To actually scale some of these ventures, you either need a very, very large country that you're a part of, or at least multiple countries where you can actually scale, right? If I was to ask that question, and more from an independent perspective, not wearing your SC Ventures hat, for banks in this part of the world, do you really think venture building is where their focus should be, or they are better served by actually using the CVC and using a more accelerated path to achieving that innovation through partnership investments?
In my experience, most of the bank owned CVCs have actually failed to make any material difference, right? You see, either when they become too close to the bank, then the bank's governance, risk appetite,
Ruins them.
onboarding, all that sort of stuff just kills it. When they are too far, then they're just there for financial returns. They don't make any material impact to the bank, right? So running a CVC within a financial institutions, historically, if you see, has really failed to make any impact whatsoever. So I think business building where you have skin in the game is actually the right way to go. Venture building is the right way to go. CVCs, yes, they can bring in capability, absolutely. But will they bring a new business model? I think that is the question you need to ask yourself.
And so, what do banks do differently then? Because you do have examples, right? JP Morgan, Citi have done fairly well. I was reading somewhere that JP alone has over 90 investments in the capital market space. I'm assuming largely out of their quasi CVC arm, if you want to call it. So, what do we need to do differently to kind of crack that code? I'm assuming it's crackable.
It is crackable. It is crackable as SC Ventures is showing continuously, right? But then when you invest, you also have to really think about what actually are you investing in. Are you investing in a capability, or you're investing in a business, right, or a business model? for that purpose. Capability investment, yes, absolutely works. You can bring in this capability and become way more efficient than you were once upon a time. But
Mhm.
has it changed your business model? And are there organizations which you're investing in actually helping you create a new business model which is occupying a white space? That's the question, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think that question definitely needs to be addressed. Um, let's switch topics, right? And I think this will sort of partly answer the question. I think in your book you mentioned the importance of ecosystem collaboration and partnerships, right? Um, that's another area, and I appreciate SC Ventures is separate to Standard Chartered, but banks tend to struggle with ecosystem partnerships and collaborations largely because fear of reputational impact, the fact that they want to control most things. Banks want to be the big player, the larger player on the table, right? So how have you guys gone about doing it differently, right? Because there is some amount of the SC in the SC Ventures DNA, which I'm sure does exist, right? So again, my question comes back to how do you guys do this differently in terms of how you partner with the wider ecosystem?
I think that there are three parts to the question. The first one is the mindset change, right? We from the very beginning we were very clear that we have to create ecosystems because the information flow in a large ecosystem is immensely powerful. The second thing, well, I should say, we are humble enough or arrogant enough, depending upon how you look at it, to acknowledge that we don't know everything.
Yeah.
And there are better people out there, like who have got more knowledge, which we can leverage, right? And the third thing is the underlying philosophy, which we have as a founding team of SE Ventures, is that if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together.
Okay.
And that is what we have set out to do. So we believe in the power of ecosystems. We genuinely believe. It's not just mere
Give
words
me a
for
couple of
us.
examples.
So you look at our crypto businesses,
Right.
right? For example, right? It's not just us who came together to create it. We partnered with other large financial institutions to create these businesses, right? If you look at our SME platform in India, we are not the only bank which are providing financing on this SME platform. We have 15 other banks, financial institutions, which are providing financing on the platform because we believe that the larger the ecosystem, the more the opportunity for the SMEs to have financing opportunities. When we create joint ventures, when we create new businesses, we create it with a partner. Let me tell you a story of a business called Task Connect.
Task Connect. Okay.
Task Connect is our supply chain automation platform, right? And it was created when a very large client of ours came to us and said, "I have this problem, right? And I don't know how to solve it because every bank I go to tells me come on my electronic channel." I went to Standard Chartered, and Standard Chartered also said come to my electronic channel. But that's not how I want to do it because I deal with multiple banks. We saw an opportunity to turn that problem into a business. But did we have full knowledge of how an internal treasury in a very large technology organization who runs the sixth biggest supply chain in the world actually works? Not really. We partnered with them. And we used their knowledge for the internal workings of the treasury to create a business which now has several very large names on its client list because they have exactly the same problem. If
Interesting.
we would have done it all by ourselves, we would have done it with our limited knowledge of treasury functions, and maybe that business would not have been able to win so many mandates, which it has done now. That is the power of information, that is the power of knowledge, and that is the power of partnerships.
Yeah, and I think that is the power of being able to, if I may say, not be a control freak.
Absolutely.
Because I guess that's kind of where again, I go back to my sort of career as consulting. Every time we actually go back, and I wouldn't say every time, but vast majority of times when we're talking to banks and we're talking about innovation, we talk about saying, I think you should use some partners to do this work. It's a little bit like, oh God, man, that is the problem. I don't know if our risk team, our regulation team, our compliance team will work or not. Which brings me to the last question on the book, right? So in the book it says balancing risk, regulation and innovation is critical, right?
Yes.
In my humble opinion, it's next to impossible to strike this balance. And I'll use this old adage, and I'm sure you've heard of it too, which is you can never have cost, quality, and speed all three together, right? And I had this conversation as recently as yesterday with someone who runs a very successful digital bank in South Africa, and I use the same thing. So how do you guys strike this balance, right? Because it is a very, very hard framework, and it's kind of like it's a moving target at all times, right? So how do you guys manage risk, regulation, innovation?
So, look, it's all about creating guardrails, but then within the guardrails, giving the freedom to experiment and play. There are certain areas which we will not compromise on. We will not compromise on financial crime, for example. We will not compromise on breaking any regulation in the country we operate in. We will not compromise on information security. But within that, you're free, feel free to play, feel free to innovate, right? We have, over the 7 years we have been in existence, worked with the risk and compliance functions to tailor the risk policies and the compliance policies for what we do. We do not blindly lift up the 250 risk policies and put them on a business. We will kill them, right? Not all policies apply to the business model which we are trying to incubate or grow, right? And I have to give credit to my colleagues in risk and compliance function. They come to it with almost as open a mind as we people who are trying to innovate to the table. It's a true partnership, right?
Keep hold of those guys. There are not many of those.
Yeah, there are not many of those, and we never see them as control functions. We see them as partners
Okay.
because without their support, it would be almost impossible
It
to
is,
do it.
and let's be honest, we're in an extremely regulated sector, and the regulation changes by country. Risk is a dynamic field. You don't have to sort of be at one place. So if you can strike that balance, hats off to you guys. I'll be honest with you, and hats off to having the right mindset among these people,
Absolutely.
right? Because
See,
most organizations challenge, they face a challenge.
it's all about people, isn't it?
It, at the end of the day, that's all.
At the end of the day, any business, and especially financial services, I always believe it's a people's business. As long as you have the right people with the right mindset, and touch wood, we have been very lucky to attract such talent. I think we'll be successful.
Great. We're going to zoom up to. Thank you for actually answering those 4 or 5 questions we had in the book. I'm sure people should read the book for themselves and not just take the 5 questions that I raised out of the book. I'm going to zoom up to 100,000 feet view, try and get a bit of a view, right? So there's no doubt, and I think you mentioned it very eloquently. Financial services is changing. It's changing arguably faster now than it ever has in a millennia. We have new technologies. We have more progressive regulation. There's all kinds of consumer behavior shift which is coming around. At the same time, there's all kinds of headwinds and trade wars and tariff problems which are coming up, right? And then to make it all very interesting, there are new business models which are emerging, right? So as the team which sits on the top and is looking at frameworks and criteria in terms of choosing the next bets, if I may call them that, and apologies if that's not the right word, right? And I'm going to take AI off the table for a second, right? What are the big shifts? What are the big disruptive trends that are exciting you guys as we sit today looking at the future?
Well, big disruptive trends. I cannot talk about big disruptive trends without talking about AI. But let's take a step back, right? In terms of why these initiatives are important. Why were banks set up once upon a time? Banks were set up to serve the societies they operate in, yeah, for their welfare, to promote trade. And what has happened now, especially after the global financial crisis? Banks have become risk averse. They have become too inwardly focused. They have multiple protocols. They are just complex beings. And believe that fundamentally the contract between the society and financial institutions is broken. And financial institutions need to redefine this contract, right? And that is why that is our guiding principle from SC Ventures. So I can talk about big disruptive trends. I can talk about artificial intelligence, and I can talk about blockchain. I can talk about these things till the cows come home. But ultimately, it all boils down to the fact is how are we actually helping the well-being of the communities we are operating in? And all these big trends and big technologies, are they just enablers or they are actual businesses which will help serve the society, right? Now, when you talk about big trends, the biggest trend which has happened in the recent time is the globalization of supply chains and the world becoming more and more global, right? How do we automate? How do we facilitate these supply chains? Is something, that's why we have world trade and SMEs as one of our key themes, right? Digital assets, we believe, are going to be a very, very relevant asset class of the future. Financial institutions have shied away from this so far, right? But we have digital assets as one of our high conviction themes. Embedded finance, digital lifestyle, it's all around us, right? What do we need to do to help our clients and our customers, both current and future, in terms of ensuring that their financial transactions are a part of the journey? They don't have to leave their journey and do a transaction and then come back to the journey, right? Digital banking and lifestyle is another one of our core themes. Sustainability and financial inclusion, especially in the markets we operate in, is all encompassing. Everything we do, every corporate has got a sustainability agenda. Everybody is talking about financial inclusion, right? That is our horizontal. Everything we do has to be with the lens of sustainability, ESG. So we look at the world in a thematic way, right? And we are very clear in terms of these are the themes we are going to serve. These are the themes under which we will either make investments or create businesses. Because while it is very important for us to understand what we are going to do, it is also very important for us to be very clear about what we are not going to do. And that is why this thematic approach. Now, within those themes, things shift, we adapt, we predict, we create.
So you have another hour now? Because we're going to go on for a long time on these five themes. No, but I do have a question, right? Again, and this is not a question directed to you as SC Ventures, but it's a conversation between two guys just sitting on, I guess, a couch and a chair, right? I think let's look at these five themes, right? Global trade, right? I think both of our careers kind of emerged and grew during this sort of era of globalization, right? We are now seeing more of a multipolar world than I guess ever before, and there's fear that it actually might materialize into something more multipolar. Sustainability, ESG, great. We have the Paris Climate Accord falling apart in some people's language. There's more greenwashing than ever before, right? I'm still not convinced that most organizations really buy into their ESG and stuff targets. Embedded finance, right? Regulators due respect everywhere in the world can't get their head around how do financial services products beyond some payments and BNPL offerings truly embed themselves into customer journeys which have nothing to do with financial services. And then there's this intra-regulatory play which has to come in, right? You look at telecoms and for example financial services. So there's that challenge. I don't want to keep going and sort of saying, so in this world of contradictions, if I may use that term, right? How do you guys are able to see things in black and white? Because, I sit back and I say, wow, these are shades of gray. Right? And I'm not referring to the book or the movie here. But how do you guys make rational decision making which has longevity attached to it, right? I don't know if is that a foolish question or an impossible question to answer, but it's what I grapple with every day in my sort of my professional career.
I don't think so. It's a foolish question or an impossible question to answer, but I think you have given the answer yourself, right? There is no black and white, right? We have to live within the shades of gray, and the world will continue to be a fairly ambiguous, amorphous entity, right? I think the trick to navigate is in two parts. The first one is you have to be comfortable with ambiguity.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of people are not. They tend to see the world in black and white. You have to be very comfortable with shades of gray. Again, goes back to my point about you don't have to know everything, right? And the second thing is adaptability and agility. You get onto a certain path, start moving on a certain path, and suddenly you find that the world has changed or the circumstances have changed. How quickly will you adapt and change? Right? Agility and nimbleness and adaptability is the key to success. Because if you're not, then you will fail. Or if you haven't started on a path, then you will fail, right? You start walking, the direction changes, you will course correct. But if you're not walking, then you're dead, right? The biggest risk is the risk of not doing anything.
Yeah, not doing anything, you're moving backwards, right?
And that is how we look at the world, right?
But have your investment horizons or return on investment horizons also changed? Have your success metrics also changed? Because as you said, there's so much ambiguity and there's possibly so many pivots and in front of you that you can't even see today. So is the whole mindset of of guys the investment committee or whatever you might have has sort of changed and said that we cannot look at 5-year, 7-year plans because to be honest with you, don't know. Let's look at the best we can do in 3 years or shorter periods of time. Is that sort of the culture you're engendering within the, I guess, within the organization as they look at investment opportunities or building ventures?
Absolutely. We pivot all the time. Our businesses pivot all the time, right? We start with a hypothesis. We try and prove the hypothesis. Sometimes we are successful. Sometimes we are not. We pivot. Sometimes we kill, right? And frankly speaking, in today's day and age, if somebody says, I have a 5-year roadmap and a 5-year vision and a 5-year plan, they're just kidding themselves because the world changes every 6 months.
I do. I do. Exactly, right? Like 2 years ago, like, what was ChatGPT? And today, again, I go back to my sector. I think we are at at a crossroad as an entire industry in management consulting, right? With the rise of AI and the rise of AI agents and how we are actually going to demonstrate value. Because to be honest with you, knowledge now, which used to be something that, we used to arbitrate and play on the power of, is now maybe a prompt away.
It's a prompt away.
And guess what? We don't even, I went ahead foolishly and did a whole course on prompt engineering. I realized you don't need to because there's AI which actually writes better prompts than you, right? So it's actually moving at a pace which is substantive. I have an interesting question, right? You operate across 50 countries and you incubate. SC Ventures operates in how many different geographies currently?
Well, we have 30 businesses across 4 continents, mostly. Yeah. So we are global.
So you're global, right? And is part of the thesis trying to about taking these businesses multi-geography?
Yes.
Right. So tell me, how does this work in the sense, how do you leverage the mothership, if at all, right? And make these businesses multi-geography? Because one of the biggest challenges with a number of, if I may say, startups which don't come with a mothership attached to them or a scale play attached to them is about being able to go around because the cost of globalization and reformation is pretty high, right? Because sometimes regulation, compliance costs are quite high. So how do you guys sort of solve for that?
So look, do we have an unfair advantage of being attached to the mothership, which operates in several countries? Yes, absolutely.
Why not?
Right? And why not use that advantage, right? But I think globalizing a business is about spotting the market opportunity. What is successful in India, what the model which is successful in India may not be successful in Kenya. What is successful in Vietnam may not be successful in Ghana, right? So not all businesses are portable because sometimes they're very, very local, right? So we are very thoughtful about which businesses actually will globalize in its current shape or form, or do they have to pivot, or they have to look at the markets in a very different way. Where where the mothership actually comes in is like, helping us understand those market dynamics, helping us understand the regulations, helping us understand what the market need is, right? So we have these inherent knowledge of the market ecosystem where we operate as a bank, which is then translated into, is there a business opportunity for a business which we have created to come into that particular market, right? So let me give you an example of our SME business in India called Solve. Solve is primarily a B2B focused e commerce platform with fulfillment services
Okay.
attached. Immensely successful in India, right? We are looking to do Solve in the GCC region because SMEs is, it's a very integral part of the vision of the sovereigns in this country,
Yep.
right? But can we lift and drop the India model into GCC? No,
No.
because the India market operates very differently. But we now have a very deep rooted knowledge of how the SME markets operate in this region by the virtue of being here for several years. Can we tailor the proposition to suit the market here? Absolutely, because we know how it works. And that's the leverage which the mothership brings to us.
Awesome. Do you have a scouting team in terms of, or is it left to the venture itself to look at which other markets they need to? So is it like a pull push? How does the model work? So
It's both.
it's
It's
both.
both, right? So now we have established SE Ventures in the GCC region. I moved from Singapore last year to the region. So I help the ventures in terms of market dynamics, market opportunities, etc. At the same time, the ventures do their own work and they come to me and say, Gautam, we think there is an opportunity here, which we help them validate and then help them set up. So it's a very partnership approach which we have between SC Ventures as a platform and the businesses we have created.
Okay, very interesting.
We are one team.
You're one team, and that's very interesting, right? And that basically means that that connectivity is not just between SC Ventures and Standard Chartered itself, but you also remain quite close to the businesses that have been incubated, and there's that two-way conversation. So it's pretty much a sort of a tri-party scenario,
Absolutely,
right?
because we think of ourselves not only as builders and investors, but we also think of ourselves as operators. That is one of the biggest parts of our job to help operate the businesses we have created and make them
Hence, you're
successful.
called operating member.
Hence, we are called operating members.
Awesome. Let me talk a little bit about the investment side specifically, right? So global economic headwinds have not gone away. We've got some stuff going around now, which could possibly make it harder. Last couple of years, VC investments, and if you may specifically talk about the wider fintech, and I don't separate digital assets from fintech because I believe tech can be any tech, right? I don't know why this sort of thing has emerged that fintech is different than cryptos. In any case, I'm sure someone has a rationale for it. I've always found it bizarre. How has the current environment, and I guess this is a three-part question, and you can choose to answer in any way you want to. One, has your risk appetite changed, right, in the last few years? Because, your peer group, if I may call them, have sort of stayed back for a number of reasons. Secondly, has it actually created more opportunities for you? Because there's a lot of good startups out there who are not getting money out of the VCs. And one of the big reasons is because I don't think most of the VCs even know what the heck they're up to, right? And their own knowledge is negligible. Again, not a very popular statement, but I kind of made it quite publicly very recently, and then I got a lot of flack from a lot of my friends, but it doesn't matter, right? And the third thing is, just risk appetite aside, has your criteria of assessment also changed in terms of the last sort of 12 to 18 months? I know there's a lot loaded in that question, so there's three parts. Choose to please answer it whichever way you want.
So, look, I think it always goes back to the thesis and the mandate, right? Our mandate is only to invest in partners.
Okay.
We do not
And what
invest.
was the partner? So I
You
wanted to ask.
need to have some relationship either with the bank or with one of our portfolio companies to become eligible for investment, right? So from that perspective, our risk appetite has not changed.
Okay,
You have to be working with us so that we know you really, really well before we deploy capital into you,
fair enough.
right? And just by the virtue of us, you working with us, we have kind of validated your capability and your readiness to work with a large enterprise, right? So from that perspective, we are very, very, I don't know whether wedded is the right word, but we are very attached to our mandate. We will not change it. We will not change it at any cost, right? So that's number one. Number two, if you look at the market in general, I think the focus has moved from growth at all cost to profitability and sustainable growth, right? And I think that is actually good for the industry. The frothy valuations of just like looking at top line, irrespective of your cost, is gone. And I think that is really good for the business because now every business who wants to raise capital in the market has to think about how am I going to grow profitable? How am I going to show sustainable growth rather than I'll spend $4 to generate a revenue of $1 and therefore I will get 6x. Those days are gone. The market frothiness is settled, right? And I think it is good for the VC industry as a whole, right? Specifically for us, yes, we see opportunities all the time, right? Businesses struggling to raise capital, coming at a lower valuation, down rounds, all that. And sometimes you are tempted. But then we go back to our mandate. Can there be a partner? Is there an opportunity? Can we work with them? Because if the answer is yes, we will take a look and we will invest or we will buy. But if the answer is no, then no matter how attractive that opportunity looks, we don't do anything. Because it goes back to what I said earlier. We are very clear about what we are going to do, but we are even more clear about what we are not going to
Not
do.
going to do. So then let me ask a flip side of the question, right? So lots of success stories. You said you've over 30 ventures and I guess 20 odd investments. So then that's a large portfolio, if I may call it,
Yep.
right? But I'm sure some of them fell by the wayside, right? So when is enough? What's kind of the magic metric that you guys look at and say, right, we either pull the plug on this, or we sort of disconnect ourselves.
See, I think it all goes back to, conviction in the business, right? And that is where the operating member or the board of the business actually plays a very critical role in constantly evaluating the business growth and the opportunity or how the market has shifted, or indeed whether our hypothesis with which we started the business was right, right? And then we have a fairly robust governance process in terms of investment committees, in terms of advisory committees, where we are constantly evaluating these businesses in terms of their viability. The interesting thing in most of these committees is that it's not just SCV and SCB people talking to each other. We have a lot of external advisors sitting on these committees who bring a very outside in perspective. So, because there's natural tendency to get very attached to what you have done,
And
what you
it's a
have
healthy
created,
thing.
right? And it is very difficult to, kill it. But by externalizing our decision-making process by bringing in external advisors, I think we have cracked the code in terms of how we evaluate our businesses for success.
And that's it's paramount, and it's happening. I'm actually pleased to hear that because, again, not pointing fingers, but banks or financial institutions are infamous about throwing money at problems, which are problems because they get too attached to a decision, right? And I
Yeah.
think if you can keep that, if I may say, that discretion, that ability to sort of distance yourself from, I guess, being overly vetted or overly, fatherly or parent-like to the entity, I think it's quite clear. Gautam, I'm cognizant of time. My last question to you. I heard a lot about the mandate, and the mandate is sort of the mantra which sort of dictates the term. I'm not going to give you a 5-year horizon. I'm just going to give you a 3-year horizon because we talked about who knows what's going to happen in the 5 years. How do you see SC Ventures in 3 years' time? Two parts to that question. Is it a lot more of what's been done in the past? Do you actually see a significant shift in the mandate coming around? You don't have to tell me what it would be, but how different is SC Ventures going to look like? I guess let's call it by 27, 28, 3 to 4 years time from now.
So, 3 to 4 years from now, let me answer the question in several parts, right? 3 to 4 years in now, we want our ecosystem to be bigger. We want our portfolio companies to be bigger. Specifically for this region, we want to be the premier venture building organization for the GCC region. But more importantly, we want to be seen as an organization which has actually made a difference in redefining the contract between financial services and the society it operates in.
Okay.
Let me tell you a story. We have just won a very large mandate for one of our businesses called MyZoy in the UAE, in Dubai specifically. MyZoy actually provides payroll services for blue collar workers through a virtual wallet, which we install on the blue collar workers' phone. And the mandate which we have just recently won, it is now in the process of being implemented, and the team is now going to the camps and onboarding those guys onto the wallet. And yesterday evening, I was sitting in my office, and a sort of blog post came from one of the co-founders of that business, because he's there in the camps onboarding these blue collar workers. And it was a very emotional post about these guys traveled for the first time in their lives. And when they reach these camps, they know no one. They are in a new country. And what they are given is what we were calling a bucket of life, literally a bucket with a pillow, a plate, and a blanket. And we are onboarding them, providing them with services for mobile top-up, for sending their salary homes, in the hope that what they are doing, we are somehow helping them change the lives of their family members they have left. That is the difference we are looking to make. And that is what is going to be at least my personal success criteria.
No, and I'm very happy to see that MyZoy is scaling. I think Asmik would know that. We actually had MyZoy come and present to the Fintech Tuesdays community, which we've created, which is right behind you, that sort of big sign. I think that was last year at GITEX, or a year before last at GITEX. And I'm very happy and very impressed to hear that. Gautam, thanks for coming. Right.
Thank you very much for having me.
Enjoyed our chat. I always say that these 45 minutes are just never enough to actually get into the meat of it. So I'm sure we'll meet again, and we'll have another sort of go at this. But appreciate you taking out time and coming this early in the morning to record an episode. Have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Gautam Jain, who's the operating member with SC Ventures. As we said, we just kicked off season 4, and I think this was quite a timely topic, which is around venture building and what banks or even non-banks should be considering doing more of. So with that, I'll say goodbye, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.